so much for doing this, Anwesh.
Thank you. I would love to have a conversation with you.
No, honestly, man. I don't know how exactly it is that I came across your profile on Twitter. I think I'm having a harder time remembering it. I think it was...
I followed you first.
You followed me first? No.
No, I did because I watched the Vivek Agnihotri thing and then I looked you up.
Well, how long ago did you look at that conversation?
I think a month ago. Something like that.
No, I've been following you for a little over that. I think I found you because you had written that letter, a 17-year-old letter to Prime Minister Modi that got pretty viral, right? And so I think I was following you then. I may be wrong, but at least you were on my tab since, because I think a couple of months ago, I tried to record a conversation on my podcast with somebody who was considerably younger. And the intent of the podcast is similar to what I'm going to try and do with you, which is try and figure out what people younger than myself. If I get told over and over, Prakhar, you're so young, how do you think about all of this? I want to know, how is it somebody younger than me is thinking about these problems better than I am? And that is precisely why I have had you here. So no pressure. do not feel any pressure. But thank you so much for doing this, man. How have you been? How's stuff around you? How's coronavirus treating you? How's jazz?
Well, it's great. You know, the lockdown's it's off right now, so we can just roam around and stuff. But I stay home usually, reading books and stuff.
Right. And reading books is a very interesting way to spend your time for a 17-year-old. When I was 17, I was chasing women. I was trying to be cool. I was trying to find the next pack of cigarettes. I was trying to see if there was any merit to the myth around marijuana being enlightening. I was doing the same with psychedelics and all of this shit. Why the fuck are you interested in what you're interested in?
It's just always been my passion. You know, I started reading, people always start reading like Enid Blyton and those kind of children's stuff. The first book that I read was Gandhi's autobiography, and I was in grade 1, standard 1 then. And since then, I've just been reading stuff. I read Dickens when I was in grade 5, and I just ordered books from Flipkart, and I've been like reading 10 books a month. Like now, I usually read if they're short, I can just read in a day, complete a book in a day. It's just what I like. I just like knowing what's inside the mind of a person. So I like ideas.
Right. That's very interesting. And it is interesting you mention Enid Blyton, right? I'll tell you why it's interesting. When I was growing up, my mother would refer to Enid Blyton. She would refer to, what's his name? The guy who lives in Shimla or someplace, Ruskin Bond, right? That was a generation of author that even precedes my generation in terms of its popularity. And why I say that's interesting is because when I was reading some of your articles, you don't write like a 17-year-old. You write like a 35-year-old, and that has good parts and that has bad parts. The great part is, well, it makes sense to 35-year-olds, but it to a 17-year-old, they would never be able to tell if it was written by somebody their age or somebody older than them. Your style of writing is very, very. I don't want to use just the word mature, but it's a different form of writing than what is prevalent in your age right now. Do you recognize that?
Yeah, well, I've been told that by a lot of people, journalists and public figures. They always tell me that, you should probably write a bit lower than that, because they think that the kind of stuff that I write is even difficult for common adults to understand. And because if you look through the articles that have been published in, say, online websites, those are very basic, but I do a lot of research, a lot of
connecting the dots.
Connecting the dots. A lot of works goes into this stuff, and of course, it's not what normal 17-year-old would read. I don't think that any teenager has ever connected with me. Like, they have read my articles, but it's like, I don't understand what you're talking about. So that has been prevalent.
My hypothesis is, have you seen any of Carrie Minati's video? Have you heard of the name?
I have heard of the name. Yeah.
Right. So think about what Enid Blyton was to a generation before me. Carrie Minati is to this generation. And there is no ignoring that. There is no fighting that. Remove the fact that he speaks in Hindi and, all of that jazz. But fact of the matter is that is the language that exists in the communication highway of your generation. And so there isn't particularly anything good or bad. I was just trying to point out something interesting I'd seen. But I have a doubt. Were you one of those people who was standing like number one in their batch, in their classes since like 7th grade, 8th grade? Were you that kind of, were you that variety?
No, I don't have great thoughts to say about the education system. I'm normally critical of it.
Right.
And I've just not been interested in, those kind of stuff. That's not the kind of medium for me to engage in.
Right.
Like I do good enough, but I wouldn't say that I have any ambition to be the topper or anything like that. Or, I cannot be.
Right.
Because it's just not how my brain functions.
Right. What is this difference? I'm curious. You're still in school, right? If you're 17, you're probably in 12th grade.
Yeah.
Did you have your results come out today?
No, I just started 12th now.
12th grade. So yeah. This delta that you're pointing to, the difference between how the school expects you to function and how you, to get great grades and how you actually function. What is this difference?
Well, Jordan Peterson, I don't know if you've watched, there's a video of him he discusses the psychology of creative people. And he talks about how creative people cannot function in the sort of traditional educational environment because, you're supposed to function in a certain way. You're supposed to be disciplined. You're supposed to stay in a box. And creative people they just can't stay in a box. They just can't follow. They're just not good at following orders. And we as a society, I think, have not found a way to grapple around that. So we just, we crush creative people because, the people who actually get the chances to go ahead are conscientious ones, the automatons, like who just like following orders and stuff. That's not me.
And so what is you then? I'm curious. What is it? Like a lot of people will define themselves by the problem that they're trying to solve, right? So they will call themselves a politician. What that means is I'm a politician who's solving a problem in the political sphere. I'm an engineer. I am an engineer who's trying to solve a problem in the technical sphere, right? So who are you? What is the problem? What is the problem statement that you are trying to solve?
I would say I'm a seeker. I just like to solve questions that the big question. What is the meaning of this, and go deep into issues and about different, because my range is very wide. Like I read about politics, psychology, sociology. So it's like extremely wide, and that's where my interest lies in. So basically, I'm trying to ask questions and not even answer them, like just ask and wonder where that answer leads me.
Right. And when or how either of those two work, how is it that you're interested in the problems that you're trying to write about? Like politics is not the most incentivized problem solving zone, right? Like even say here is my hypothesis. Okay, Anwesh starts reading books. He loves thinking. He loves seeking answers, and those answers are coming to Anwesh, and Anwesh is very good at coming with answers, and that's a rewarded system. Now Anwesh has to decide. He's like, wait, hold up. Do I want to get into politics, or do I want to get into like XYZ sphere? Why is it that you take up one of the hardest, the least incentivized domains, which is politics, to solve problems? Why that?
Because it's a domain that concerns all of us. It's something that we don't talk about, and when we talk about it in a very partisan manner. You have to like take sides and stuff that. I just want to talk about what I think. I just want to read both sides and then make up my mind on what to think. Sometimes the right is correct, sometimes the left is correct. So you're right that it's not that interesting to beginners, but once you get into it, extremely interesting. And the primary reason why I write about these topics is because that these topics impact us. Like I wouldn't be writing about politics if it was not that important for society, but I think it's important, and I think we need to have an open conversation about it, and I think we're not having that. We might be over here, we are having that conversation on this podcast, whether on your podcast or Joe Rogan or whatever, but it's extremely hard to have these kind of open conversations if you do not take sides. And I think there's a market now which basically is thirsting, is demanding that people, independent thinkers, it's not that you don't lean left or right or whatever, it's just you just say what you think. You don't say what your audience wants you to say. You say what you think, and there's a huge market for that, and that gap needs to be filled. And I think you are filling that, and well, I'm trying to fill that in my own
Who are you
manner.
talking to? Which one are you talking to? Me filling gaps?
Yeah.
I don't know about that. But thank you so much. I appreciate that. That is part of the intent that I have as well. And the way I describe it is that the reason why at least asking questions about politics is necessary to me is because it is quite impossible to separate the personal and the political. Not probably in the sense that Hannah Arendt meant, probably in a different sense. I think the axiom applies differently when you say the personal is the political, but also because there is such an abundant lack of sense making around political facts right now. Right? It is not just that BJP came into power and they have an ideological narrativist kind of a view where they want to, shift narratives, and that's what's causing confusion. It's also that social media and traditional media suddenly started competing very heavily, and ad revenue started to go down, and then dramatics instead of information became incentivized in those models. So now Arnab Goswami has to perform. He has to shout. And in that shouting, what he gets high is his TRP ratings, but what he gets low is his audience's IQ. And I want to respect my audience's IQ. I want to ask questions that matter to them. Even if it's one person or it's 5,000 people, I don't care. But I'm not going to disrespect my audience's IQ by saying this is what the audience wants. I'm not going to play that game. And so I really respect that a 17-year-old is trying to do that. Let me ask you this. How successful have you been trying to be an independent thinker? What do you think is your, like, how objective can you be? How independent can you remain? How bipartisan or non-partisan can you remain?
So I don't think that it's about remaining non-partisan. I think it's about making my own biases clear. I make it clear that, it's not that I don't have any views or that I don't lean left or right. I just make it clear that most of my views probably lean left. Some of them obviously lean right. But I think that about being successful, I would say that one thing that I've noticed is when I write an article, say a well-researched article or something like that, criticizing a particular side, say I write an article criticizing the left wing, then it gets a lot of views from the right wing, and it just boosts up, right? So when I criticize the left, when I criticize the right, it gets a lot of views from the left wing. And I think that when I criticize both, that doesn't get a lot of reading. So I don't think that I've been that successful. So there is still a partisan thing that is going on. People respond based on their political biases. I have noticed that a lot of people do not read what I write. What they do is they just look at the writing, they just look at the what I want to express.
Who is he blaming?
Yeah, who is he blaming?
That's
yeah,
it.
Exactly. So if I blame, for instance, if the letter to Modi that I wrote, then the liberals will start crying over it, right? So I think that is still present over there. So I think it's very hard to be successful when you're trying to be nuanced
Enough, right? I agree with that. You pointed that out about my podcast as well, which was like, if you're going to continue playing this game, and a lot of people have, Abhinandan Sekhri has, and a lot of other gentlemen have, is like, if you keep playing this game where you cater to both sides, you will get none of that. And my intent is not to cater to anybody. That's not what I'm trying to do. My intent is to have a civil conversation, hear people out, right? Like I released an episode with J.Sai Deepak, who I think is a brilliant fellow. I don't know if you followed him. I think the way he
Yeah,
thinks
I've
is quite
watched that
interesting.
episode.
Right. I think the way
Yeah.
he thinks is quite interesting. And what I wanted to put out for an introduction, which I could not that week, was extremely busy for me, was something along the lines of this. It is unimportant to me what Anwesh thinks. As long as there is no internal contradictions in his thinking and there is no self-serving biases, in my democratic model of free speech, Anwesh is allowed to say whatever the fucking hell he wants. I don't care, right? And I'm fine. I'm going to entertain that. I'm going to play along. I'm going to ask him questions in his playing field instead of force him to come to my playing field. And the point is that the market that exists for political conversation is not for nuance, is for righteousness. Please tell me
Yeah.
I'm right. Please tell me I'm right. Please. You, like when I put out that conversation with J.Sai Deepak, I don't know how much he understands this, but there is a fanaticism around that man. There is a fanatical nature of people. It's like anything that JSD says is right. Anything. JSD said, Namaste. Aapki health kharab hai, JSD said. YouTube comments mein. And then you begin to understand that part of the reason is because he is making a very nuanced point for a side that nobody is articulating properly. And so people don't care about what he's saying. As long as he's affirming the right-leaning narrative, the Indic narrative, we are with JSD. And it's the same with Jordan Peterson, right? You have to be an incredible amount of stupid to tell me that women in India have achieved equal whatever power, responsibility, rights, whatever. And if you're using Jordan Peterson's argument, one, you've not understood what he's saying. Two, you're distorting your reality by using his argument. Nothing else. And so the reason why Peterson became successful as well, even though he was trying to make a very nuanced point, was because there were enough people on one side of the spectrum who were feeling unrepresented, unarticulated. And they just saw who is to blame. What Peterson's saying, these guys are to blame. Okay, fuck these guys, end of story. And that is the case. You need to take sides in politics to appear, to get, monetary, whatever, viewership success or whatever that is. And it's a sad reality of where we're at now.
I absolutely agree with you. I think that the way this game goes is basically that side is evil, this side is good. We're absolutely moral people, we're perfect. Right. That side wants to destroy the country, or that side wants to convert the country into a Nazi fascist state. Those are, you cannot have a rational discourse with these kind of people. For instance, some days back, this Twitter professor, he's a professor of peace. He tweeted a very normal image of BJP people taking pledge, and he wrote that, look, this is not the Nazi salute. And that was not an argument, that was an ad hominem attack, but it got so much influence from these the liberal kind of people. And when I pointed it out, I was called a BJP supporter. Now I have become a Sanghi or whatever. And so these kind of terms are being thrown around, and these kind of terms are being thrown around in both the sides. So I think that what is wrong with the state of our political discourse is the fact that we look at it from a moral perspective. Like, we say that we are moral, they're immoral. It's not people, they're people who disagree with us. It's that they're immoral people, they're evil people. They need to be shut down because they're making a mess of the world. So Peterson is transphobic. Ben Shapiro is homophobe. Well, he is a homophobe. I mean, I've made that argument quite clear.
Right.
Are all of these arguments, but there's a nuanced way to make this argument. You can make a nuanced argument that Modi is an authoritarian. You don't have to say that Nazi, fascist. That is not a nuanced argument.
But right? It's not digestible. No, the whole point of trading off nuance is to make it efficient. The idea becomes efficient if I'm like, hey, consider yourself the best person in the world. Okay, I can believe that. But if I'm like, wait a second, only if, and then only if, and then only if I add all that nuance, the digestion becomes improper. That's why slogans work, because slogans are the most unnuanced version of a side. Right? And so it's like, there was something I saw on Instagram. I don't know if you spend enough time on Instagram yourself. Are you on Instagram?
I'm not on Instagram.
Good choice. There was something about this woman who was talking about comedians, and I've been excited to talk about this all day.
Yeah.
And she's like, these Krantikari comedians, they only make fun of Hinduism and Hindu faith and blah, blah, blah. And that video is bloody viral. That video is 500,000 views in 24 hours. Right? And I will make a point that's nuanced. I'm like, this is an identity crisis that men are trying to resolve through Hindustani Bhau and Shubham Badass, whatever his name is. And barely anybody will bat an eye. That is how the human brain functions. Let's identify a common enemy and let's fight with them. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I think that the one thing that we need to understand in what is happening in our political discourse is a lot of this talk about history. So what is happening, the same thing that we're treating, these ideologies as, we're also treating historical figures in the same way. So the Congress will say, Gandhi is ours, Savarkar is theirs. The BJD wing will say, that Savarkar has been maligned. Well, he has been maligned, but that, he's this perfect figure. So we have these kind of portrayal of these figures which are historically inaccurate. I think that all of us, we need to discuss these historical figures in a sort of academic environment. We need to discuss about them based on what they said, based on evidence, understanding what their flaws were, what their good acts were. But the thing is, when politicians talk about history, they make a caricature of history. So I don't think that Rahul Gandhi, if he has any understanding of history, he gets it wrong. That he says, Savarkar was this. So the thing is, if you talk to these people, you know what they're going to say. So for instance, if I talk to a person who believes in the Congress ideology, you know exactly what his views are. You will know that he believes that Savarkar was a evil person, a traitor. You know that he believes that the Gandhi dynasty are just perfect. He believes that the BJP is a fascist state. So these kind of sort of arguments that have been put forward, but which are not nuanced at all. So I think our politicians are harming the discourse significantly.
The same system, right? It's politicians are not incentivized. Like I am at some amount of my core, I'm an economic thinker, right? I think in pressures, I think in supply demand curves and all of that jazz, at least, right? And politicians as a business model are not incentivized to tell you the truth. The market is not for the truth or your truth. The market is for emotion. The market is to get people behind you. And if you have to do that, it's a significant divorce from telling the truth. You might sometimes tell the truth and get people behind you. There is a common overlap, some degree, but most of it is independent. So I will just say, and that's my problem. If you have to interpret Prime Minister Modi for me, if you have to make a case still that Rahul Gandhi should continue fighting as the prime ministerial candidate from Congress, if you have to argue for a political leader to convince me, then they've not done their job properly enough. If you're telling me, like Rahul Gandhi got on Twitter now and like whatever, started doing live sessions with people and having conversations, right? I have been saying,
to be a YouTuber.
Right? I've been trying to say, he's trying to compete with me. I've been trying to say this for years. It's like, bro, if your image is not in your hands and if the media is doing all these things to you, like you're saying, then take it in your hands. You have the means. There is enough people who follow you still. If there is something to be learned from YouTubers is that they get into fights and they go out of favor all the time and they come back in favor again. The reason why Rahul Gandhi cannot do that is because there is no merit in that man. And India has spoken about it in 2 different electoral campaigns. We do not want the Gandhi dynasty around us anymore. You accept it or not, that's the end of them for me. If you do not put out a Sachin pilot, I don't know what's going to happen with that. I want to get to that and talk to you about that too. Or if you do not put out like a Shashi Tharoor even, I'm just saying, like if you do not put out other names, and if it's still the Gandhi dynasty, you then haven't calculated the amount of damage Sonia Gandhi, that name, did to the Congress party back in 2004. How young were you? How young were you then when in 2004? You were like 1 year of age?
Yeah.
Right? 1 or 2?
So I think I was one
Right.
year.
Right.
So I think that the Congress party has utterly failed. The only reason the BJP won, despite all these, their failure in economic terms, is because of the incompetence of the Congress party. The Congress party is now acting as an NGO. They talk about these very leftist sort of talking points, which will not get to people. So if you, for instance, if you question national security and this kind of stuff, this will not get to people. I can talk about that. We can have a conversation about that here, because we don't have a stake, but they have to win the elections, right? So they have to have a mainstream conversation, and you have to understand that the people of India are not ready, clearly not ready to understand the nuances of it. The people vote based on emotions, and that's just a fact. And well, the first thing is that they have utterly failed in the narrative aspect. The second thing is the fact that Rahul Gandhi is he's clearly incompetent. Like, he's incompetent in every sphere that you can imagine. Like, he's been in the only public office that he has occupied is that of MP, and his performance as an MP has been below average. I made a thread about detailing that today.
Right.
Like he's not even an average MP, and you're asking this guy to be the prime ministerial candidate. People are not going to elect him. Well, that's just a fact. So what the Congress needs to realize right now is that if they want to win election, first they need to get rid of the Gandhi dynasty. They need to put a charismatic, able leader. For instance, if they put, for instance, Captain Amrinder Singh as the president, the BJP will not dare. Yeah, the
president of the
candidate,
party.
right.
President
of the Congress party. The BJP will not dare question him on national security. The BJP will not dare call him an anti-national, because the BJP doesn't call him an anti-national even now. They respect him. So you have to. So if you want to change narrative, you have to change narrative in that manner. But the Congress will not do that, because the Congress party is surrounded by sycophants who, every day they talk about the Gandhi family. They basically pray to the Gandhi family. So I think the Congress is basically doomed. Yogendra Yadav said the Congress has died. I think he was correct.
Let's move one step back and criticize ourselves before we criticize somebody else. That's usually the rule of law I follow with my So here's the deal. What we need to both realize at the end of the day is that I've been disillusioned with the whole democratic idea. I've been reading a lot of Carl Schmitt and shit like that, and it makes sense to me. But here's the deal. At the end of the day, it is some amount of true that the prime ministerial notion of who's going to be the prime minister, president, whatever, head of state is a popularity contest. There is no denying that. And what that means is that part of the reason why you win is not meritocratic, but marketability. And we know that from Prime Minister Modi's example very well. The whole idea is he may be doing good, he may be doing great, he may be doing bad, he may be doing shit. But the marketing is A1. People get the message A1. And the reason why the Indian National Congress seems to be insisting on Gandhi is for that reason, because they understand it's a popularity contest and the Gandhi name still holds value. And I think that very premise, that the Gandhi name still holds value, is where they're wrong. They haven't understood that the country of India, the nation of India, the people of India have turned on that name. And they've turned on the name very similarly to the way that name was turned in a particular favor back when Indira Gandhi was married to who was she married to? The adopted Feroz Gandhi, right? So that name was borrowed for a particular intent back in the day. And now that reversal is sort of complete, where we are like, listen, we do not, Gandhi and corruption is synonymous. So here is what I'll remind you. What you don't remember from 2004 possibly is because you were too young. I was 8, 9, something along those lines. And I remember the sheer disbelief of Sonia Gandhi winning that election. Because back then, Manmohan Singh was not heading the state. Sonia Gandhi won the election. And the newspapers were asking, are we going to be ruled by a white person again? We were in shock. And that by itself, if somebody was smart enough, I don't know if somebody was, they should have signaled the fact that that is where the Gandhi name comes to an end. As soon as it gets associated with a white person, everything that Gandhi stood against. And from there, Manmohan Singh had to step up. And then Manmohan Singh presidency was one of the most flaccid, one of the most inactive, like one of the most heart-wrenching prime ministership states that India has had. And have you seen Rang De Basanti?
Yeah.
Have you seen
I
it
have.
recently enough?
Amir Khan. Yes, I think I watched it some months ago.
Okay, so I watched it again after a lot of years the other day for a series that I'm doing for my YouTube. And the whole premise of that film is that the defense minister is involved in a scam that is hurting its own pilots. Right? That's the premise of the film. And that back when that film came out, 07, 06, whenever that came out, was not an unbelievable thing. Right now, you know for a fact, we may make stupid mistakes on Chinese border and end up getting our troops killed. Separate story. We'd probably get killed because of pride. You know, back then it was not unimaginable that our own ministers were eating from our own people. Back then, the problems were more internal of that nature, where corruption instead of pride was what would get us killed. And so the point is that I understand the criticism against the BJP. I'm for that. I'm absolutely with you. And I want to discuss some of them with you. Yeah. But if you are not awakening to the fact that the Gandhi name let a nation who had a story going for itself, a national myth. We had one national myth after 1991, 2020 superpower. And they let us down. They leached the shit out of this nation in terms of faith, in terms of resources, in terms of like a narrative. We lost all of that in that prime ministership. And I don't think people understand the weight of that. Like to say 5 years hence that I don't want to vote for a Gandhi because that's just not, no, I will vote for BJP, anybody but Gandhi, tells you what kind of a trauma my parents' generation, your parents' generation is suffering from with the Congress leadership. It's like we just do not trust them. And they are not signaling the faith by changing their leadership. Right? What is happening in Rajasthan right now? What is this crazy stuff between Ashok Gehlot and Sachin Pilot? You've been following up, right?
Yeah. So I think that what is happening in the Congress in general is the fact that many people are starting to wake up. They're starting to realize that, if we want to win election, we need to have, we need to capture the narrative. And the Gandhi family is not just good enough to do that. They sacked Sanjay Jha, who is like one of the
spokesperson.
He was called as a sycophant of the Gandhi family. So if you sack him for saying simply that the Congress needs to conduct internal elections, which is absolutely necessary, because if you look at the people who have been the president of the Congress for the last 10 or 20 years, Sonia Gandhi and Rahul Gandhi, like that's it. Look at the people who have been president of the BJP party. They've had, I think, 7 or 8 presidents, right? So that just says a lot about this thing. So I think that if you keep this personality, because I think the Congress was running because due to a sort of personality cult, and I think that personality cult has totally failed. Like people are not willing to elect the Gandhis anymore. They're just fed up. They're just fed up with the Gandhis, and they're not going to elect them anymore. So I think right now, Sachin Pilot is probably going to. I hope that he doesn't leave the Congress. I hope that that these people who have stood up, they reform the Congress from within and kick out the Gandhis. But that just it's not realistic. I mean, let's be honest. The Gandhi family is not going anywhere because they have these sycophants surrounding them, and that's that.
Well, the good news is they're not having any more kids, so say
no,
might.
They're going to Priyanka Gandhi. She has kids. I saw this. She was introducing her kids in a political rally. So, well, you have another generation.
Right. Which isn't all of the criticism that we levied on Congress isn't to say that you and I don't have independent criticisms of the BJP. And it does not even say where we fall on the entire spectrum, right? It's like, just because I criticize Congress does not mean that I might not end up voting for Congress 3 years down the line. Even out of my helplessness, I might still do that. And I'm not saying I will, right? I like the 2014, I can tell you for sure I would have voted for BJP. There is no denying that. 2014. 2019, I wasn't in India and I wasn't really looking to make up my mind. It was such a tricky terrain, whatever was happening around then. So, what do you think about the state of affairs as they stand right now?
Well, I think that Indian democracy has sort of been hijacked by these two parties, because let's be honest, Mr. Modi is an authoritarian. I'm not using the buzzword fascist, Nazism. I will not go that far, but it's clear that he has an authoritarian personality. Right?
Yeah, what is an authoritarian personality?
Well, the authoritarian personality, I mean, he simply doesn't listen to people around him. Anybody, who like has any ambition of, becoming his successor, he just has no interest in that. So I think that he surrounds himself.
How do we know that?
Well, I know that. Well, I personally know that from conversations with people that are in the BJP. So they talk about these things a lot. That he surrounds himself with bureaucrats, and that's been the narrative that has been going around.
No. Let me get that right, because this is news to me. I'm sorry, I'm cutting you short. I don't mean to do that, but this is very interesting to me. So you were telling me he surrounds himself with public servants and bureaucrats only, and he does not surround himself with politicians.
Primarily, except for, I think, Amit Shah, who he really respects.
And what's wrong with that?
Because I think that actually has led to the personality cult that has been created in India around Modi. That may get him win the election, but for the long term, I think it's extremely harmful for our country. I mean, because
please,
because it's not just that he has this personality of an authoritarian, because Trump also has this, this authoritarian personality, psychologically speaking. But I think the problem with Modi is that that his authoritarianism sort of goes deep into the political sphere. Like, he shuts down dissent, and anybody who sort of he has created a narrative that anybody who raises his voice against him is basically anti-India, and he's basically helping that narrative to gain traction by not admonishing those who propagate it. And these aren't small people. Like Tejasvi Surya, the MP, he's not just a random person.
He's not fringe.
Yeah. So when he says that, if you vote against Modi, you're voting against India. And when the BJP just goes along with that narrative, just clearly means, what the BJP wants. It wants to create that narrative that we are nationalistic. Yeah.
I can follow that. Let me try and let's try and joust a little bit, right? If I were to defend Tejasvi Surya, which is against my own principles, by the way, I would say that the reason why he says something like that is because you can only have the lowest common denominator be passed on. If you give a nuanced idea for a slogan, people will be like, no, this seems too complicated. And the general notion being, like we just discussed, the Gandhis were sucking India dry. So if you don't vote for Modi and you're voting for the Gandhis, you were not voting in the interest of India. My doubt is, I don't know about authoritarian personality. I want to get into that with you a little bit more. I think the RSS and the BJP are delusional to the effect where they think they think they know what is right. And they may know what is right better than the INC. I'm not denying that. But that is a very special variety of self-importance and narcissism that does not begin with the individual. So I'm not sure if it's authoritarian. It's more like, we care for the country. We are the first in a while who care for the country. We care, so we will. So the kind of corruption you expect now is an ideological corruption, is a corruption of the narrative about India. It's not corruption that will fill Modi's pockets up, which was very unlike what was happening with Priyanka Gandhi and her husband Robert Vadra and all that jazz, right? So it's this self-assuredness, it's this self-righteousness that I know what is correct for my country, and that is it. Everybody else has lost the plot. That worries me more than an authoritarian personality. What is authoritarian about Modi in particular, and not the ideology that Modi comes from? Because the ideology is authoritarian, no denying.
Yeah.
Is Modi authoritarian as a person? That is what I'm interested in.
I think it works both the ways. I think that Modi is, because if he would not have been authoritarian, and this is my hypothesis, just that he would have stopped the cult of personality being formed around him, right? So he
please finish. I'll tell you something interesting
so
after.
So if he would have been sort of this, this democratic person, then when people talk about him being, the avatar of Vishnu, or all these things that the ideas of the Messiah that they sold to us, then he would have just admonished them, because he does that a lot in his interviews. He talks about how normal he is and all these things, but he won't admonish the people who treat him like a god. And the fact that this narrative has continued just proves that he has no problem with it. Like at least he's fine with that narrative being going on, and I think that is extremely problematic. Second thing is that the ideology that the BJP follows clearly has not just authoritarian streak but also social conservative streak. I have heard this from a lot of Hindutva people, that Hindutva is all about reform, and they talk about how Savarkar talked about how his views were progressive than Gandhi, which I totally agree with. If you look at it from that perspective, then Savarkar was mostly socially progressive than Gandhi. He was extremely anti-caste. Like, fine, like I'm fine with that. But you also have to understand that this trick of the writings of Savarkar as well as Golwalkar, not necessarily Savarkar, but essentially Golwalkar, advocates for a nation which is basically follows a religious approach, a theological approach, which shuns the mixing of the sexes. Golwalkar talked about that in his books. Like, he was disgusted by the fact that in this Congress, he went to a Congress rally, and he saw men and women volunteering together, and he was disgusted by that. He was disgusted by modern clothes. So that streak, I think, is also present in the BJP, and I think there's a denial going on that the Hindutva intellectuals are essentially saying that that's not it. So I think do not deny it, because if you deny it, what you're doing is you're basically dog whistling. You're basically saying that we are here to this is the public version, but this is what we are actually going to do. But reject them, like cite them, say that these are the fringe. Yes, this is what Golwalkar said, but we don't agree with it, and we dissociate ourselves with those people. But that's not what's happening, right? The RSS, many branches of the RSS, the Sangh Parivar, they basically advocate this hatred and this misogynist attitudes that are going on, which I go into detail in my writing.
I'll admit I sat in Sangh meetings. I sat in more than one Sangh meeting growing up. I think the last time I was in a Sangh meeting was when I was 17 or 16 or something around that time, right? My dad had the privilege of going to school because Sangh was sponsoring that school because he was that poor. And so he comes from a particular frame of mind. And to me, that's why the RSS idea or the BJP idea is not very foreign, because I see it in him. Right? It's been very, very, and I don't know about misogyny. To be very honest, I had never come to identify the Sangh the way they are identified now from the inside. There was never a conversation about disliking somebody in all the meetings that I went to. And I'm not saying that there might be. I remember sitting through a lecture with what's the South Indian, Ram Madhav. Ram Madhav came to the city that I live in, and he gave a lecture about the Chinese strategy and their expansionism. This is back, I don't even know how I remember. This is older than 10 years. This is way more than that, right? And I sat through that. And now he's the general secretary. The last I saw him was at Columbia, and he was speaking there. And I was like, there is an opportunity for people to rise up. Back then he was a pracharak. Now he's the general secretary of BJP, So the point being, it was all the lectures I attended were about sovereignty, were about national security, were about sense of identity. And there might have been dog whistling. I might have been too young to understand that. But from somebody who sat in there, it's less wild than what it is made out to be, at least from my experience. All right. The second thing that I do not understand about this Hindutva carrying, and you saw how I was tweeting about 17-year-olds today. That was not about you. That was about the other 17-year-olds. the whole this revival of the Hindutva identity on the internet and the amount of freedom to say whatever the shit you want without thinking about it, without responsibility and consequences, has made me realize a certain few things. Is that all traditional ideologies, all of them, they're trying to do something good, and we'll get to that, but they're ignoring economics. There is no way in hell you can be against what the Western influence, let's just say. If you are going to be a free market, geopolitical body, which has international relations with other geopolitical bodies, influence is going to happen. That's economics, that's not politics. No amount of narrative shifting is going to change that. If you tell me, Atmanirbharta, hey, your phone switched off.
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah, fine.
If you're telling me Atmanirbharta means I go out and buy an Indian phone, that's not going to happen. Atmanirbharta means you tell somebody in Bangalore to make a phone better than an iPhone. That's when I'm going to buy. Because economics, money, in that sense, is way more powerful than stories. Let us be super real about that in the democratic sense of the word. Like, I'm not saying I'm a Marxist. Marx was an economic determinist. He said there is only economics and everything else is influenced by that. I say, in the fight between economics and culture, usually economics wins, especially in a country that's as hungry as India.
It will win, but it will not help you win in elections. You have to understand that we do not have a free have a free market party. We both the Congress and the BJP are essentially socialist parties. We do not have a libertarian conservative kind of thing. We have socially conservative BJP, which is in economic terms, the BJP is farther left than the Congress party. So what we have is different strands of left wing. We do not have an economic right wing in India, though I think we need it. Because I think that's essentially how we're going to, all this talk of superpower and this nonsense, you cannot have it without free market.
Of course.
We're not having that.
No, we're nowhere near close. Absolutely not. The best way we've learned how to organize our societies is the freedom for self-interest. And if that's not clear from the American example, we've got to be looking at things more carefully. But here's what I'll say. I was in a lecture with one of the most, I'd say he's one of the more important thinkers in political economy. This was last semester, so before 2020 began. And I spoke to him about this problem once. And I was like, from the models that you're telling me, he was telling us he was going about economic models. He's like, what is the case where my country wins? How is it that I can imagine in your prescriptive modeling, India coming out on top? And he's like, it won't, the game's rigged against you. Right? And the point is that in some sense, the game is rigged against us in a chronological sense. So here is the deal. What the BJP is doing right is providing a national myth to my people. It is very important to find an identity so that you don't have to wake up next day and look for a new one. You have a common dream. The American dream works here. The Chinese dream in China works in some sense. And you need a common myth. And so what they're trying to do is go back and create a myth, whatever that might be. But that is getting caught with the movement of time forward, where things have moved past the point. So we never got we never got a chance enough to live in a world where we could develop our domestic industry for long enough. We could insulate them, we could incubate them, and then go out and come. Now we are facing this pressure from the outside world where the influence is going to happen because money is flowing from the outside. And we still have to go inside and look for a sense of self. And in that process, come up with an absolutely novel model of governance, something that we've never seen before. Something that's not right wing or left wing. And I think that is the friction. What do you think? I think you're excited to answer.
I think this is exactly, what I've been thinking about is the fact that, the main problem that I have with Hindutva ideology is because, I've had lots of conversation with these Hindutva people. And I think many of them really do believe in a sort of moderate Hindutva position. And I am willing to, I have all respect for them. And, I've had nice conversations with them. But my liberal friends are going to kill me for that.
Now you're friends with me. Rules have changed.
Yeah. So, but I think that the main reason why I can never buy that idea is because Hindutva talks about a glorious past. And you cannot move forward with the idea of a glorious past, because left-wing extremism and right-wing extremism are very different. Left-wing extremism talks about a glorious utopian future. And the right-wing extremists, they talk about the glorious utopian past. And if you're stuck in the past, in a third world country like India, like you can have this conversation in United States, right? You can have the conservatives talking about this thing but in India, what we need to do is we need to move forward. We need radical changes, because we do not have in India complete freedom of speech like you do in America. We do not have gay marriage. We need to first solve these issues, and then we can have the conversation about the past or whatever, the cultural wrongs or reparations or whatever you want to talk about that. But first we need to sell the myth of a glorious future instead of the glorious past.
Indians need to stop looking for identity in the past. Listen, here's the hard truth that people like you and I, people who are autonomous, people who are strong, people who love our fucking countries have to believe in, have to accept, is that we were somebody's bitches for longer than we'd want it to be. If you want to go in the past and claim Hinduism is great, you have to do a 600-year journey back in the past. And that's asking for anybody, that's asking for too much. Fact of the matter is, and it's a hard fact, is that we were really mistreated because we were a certain way. For whatever want or reason. We were dispersed, we were tribal, or whatever. In fact, there is enough stories about how the creation of Hinduism happened as a function of oppression, right? That we had to band together. There is enough literature on that too. The point being that may not be true, but it is symptomatic of something, which is that 600-year-old Hinduism, 1400s, before Babur came, was absolutely different from how we know it today. There is no denying that. Don't look for identity there. You are right. Look for identity in the future. Because if you're truly patriotic, the number one thing you need to be doing, I think, is demanding reparations from the British. Getting Kohinoor diamond back as a symbolic. Getting them to accept the first people who need to be told what India is the British, nobody else. And the way you do that is by becoming a strong, independent economic force. We are watching that happen in front of our eyes. As the graph for the UK goes down, step by step, day by day, the graph for India sort of goes up. Eventually, we might be in that position, but get to that position if you're truly patriotic. Do the entrepreneurial work. Do the honest public work. Do that stuff honestly. If you really want to feel powerful, if you really want to make your kids feel powerful, I understand your trauma. I understand where you're coming from. We're a powerful breed of people who were made to feel incompetent for far too long. There's a trauma there, and I understand that. But the way you do that is by empowering your future, so that then we can demand whatever the hell we want from people who were unjust to us in the past. You cannot do that by creating a myth. You cannot do that by creating an absolute myth that is 600 years old, 500, 300 year old. It cannot be. The world has changed, and the world does not change. Have you heard of Moore's law?
No.
So
I have heard. Yeah.
So the idea being that every year the world changes twice as fast as it did before. Technology changes twice as fast. The point being, over the last 10 years, we have changed 50 years, not 10 years, because it's 1, 2, 4, 6, that is 8. You always change at twice the pace. The point is, you cannot be looking for that identity in your past. I understand. Be proud of who you were, but shut the fuck up for the next 50 years. Work hard. If we become...
So I think that another problem that I have with this past thing, the glorious past argument, is the fact that it's wrong. It's just not true. Because if you go through statistics, if you read Steven Pinker's works, he shows you how the world was 600 years ago. You don't want to live life 600 years ago. You don't want to go back, because life was just absolutely terrible. We live like right now is the best time that has ever been for us as a species. We live in the best time, and we need to accept that. And from here we only need to move forward to the future. And the thing is that that India right now, I think, needs forced liberalization, like liberalization in the social sense of the word, because most of the people in India are basically homophobic. That is a fact. A huge portion of India is still casteist. a huge portion is misogynist. So we cannot afford to have conversation about the excesses of the LGBTQ movement, the excesses of feminism. What we need is, well, we do not have legalization of gay marriage yet in India. So how can you talk about the excesses of LGBTQ movement when it's not even legal in India? Like, you can have that conversation in America, but in India right now we need forced liberalization. The Hindu code bill, which came, the Hindu civil law, which came in the immediate aftermath of independence, it was basically forced. The constitution of India was basically forced on people, because most of the people then there were not having these lofty ideas, right? So this was basically forced, and then people got to come around it and accept it. And we need to do the same thing right now. And that is exactly what happened in America. So I'll give you one example, the gay marriage issue. So I've been reading the writings of Ben Shapiro for quite a while, and he's a perfect example. So he's been opposing gay marriage his entire career. He opposed it up until the Supreme Court gave the judgment. Even after that, he tweeted against it. But then the conservatives basically understood that, this is an issue that is behind us. This is an issue that we just need to accept and move on, make peace with. Yeah, right. So I think that to come to that stage, you have to basically force it, because the likes of Ben Shapiro will never advocate for gay marriage. The liberals will, right? So you need to force it, and then the conservative wing, the Hindutva wing, or whatever, they will come to accept it. So I think that is what India needs right now. And this narrative of a glorious past is making things worse for this country.
I mean, in some sense, I still think it is making things better, but maybe in the net, it might have a negative effect. And I always think that political decisions, political stories, political events always flower in retrospect. And so, we can only do predictions with minimum amount of variables in our head, while the real world system is like, maybe we force it. But what happens is, hypothetically, RSS goons start beating up every guy who's trying to marry every other guy. And so even if it's legal, it's barely helping, kind of thing, So I'm just saying there's too many factors involved.
But that's the first step, right?
Oh,
so if you,
to me, here is where I'm at. Okay, this is going to sound slightly funny. To me, I cannot construct a first principle approach to marriage in the 21st century. I understand it's a tradition. I understand it's working. I am monogamous as hell. I'm not polygamous. Like, when I'm with somebody, I'm with somebody. I'm not denying that. But getting the government involved in my relationship is a bit much in any sense of the word.
Yeah, but you cannot make that libertarian argument in the Indian context, because we already have the government involved. So, the idea of, getting the government out of marriage is more improbable than getting legalizing gay marriage. So I think that's the pragmatic approach.
Right. You were brilliantly said. I mean, I'm with you on that. It's because the tradition, let's say the tributary of tradition is broad enough in this area that you cannot construct a dam of that nature with first principles. I know that's not what I'm just saying. Like, to me, just marriage is getting the government involved much. I would happily spend my life with somebody as long as nobody's telling me what to do. And that is just me personally. But tell me about Syama Prasad Mukherjee. That's a name that's been coming up in my research a lot. And I heard you tweet about him too. Tell him, I've heard he's the only proper right-wing figure in India, economically speaking, free market, free speech and whatnot. Is that true?
In terms of economics, I'm not sure. But in terms of free speech, absolutely. Because what happened... See, in the United States, you have the First Amendment. The First Amendment was made to protect free speech. In India, the First Amendment was made to restrict free speech. So that's the difference between India and the US. So what happened essentially is that in the immediate aftermath of the independence, the courts basically advocated for complete freedom of speech. And that... there was this famous judgment by Justice Prasad. In one of his judgments, he said that, even advocating for murder is free speech. So they were basically advocating for absolute freedom of speech. And that sort of urged the people who were in power. So what their first reaction was to bring in the First Amendment and to restrict freedom of speech. And in that First Amendment, they mentioned that those lines of Justice Sarju Prasad, because that served as a sort of catalyst. There were other events. There was this, the RSS, the Bridge Bhushan case, the RSS magazine organizer was asked to submit all its material on Pakistan before it published to the government, and it went to the court and won the case. And then there was a Marxist Anwesh Satpathy case, Crossroads, I think that was the magazine. And he also won the argument. The state was trying to ban the circulation of that magazine. So, the government at that time thought that it needed to control freedom of speech, that freedom of speech was not absolute. So the First Amendment was brought. And the First Amendment in India was supported by, it was brought primarily by Nehru, it was supported by Patel, it was supported by all of Rajendra Prasad, C. Rajgopalachari, it was supported by even B.R. Ambedkar, right? The only prominent figure opposing it was Dr. Syama Prasad Mukherjee. He was the one who said, who was advocating for absolute freedom of speech. He was the one who was advocating against sedition. Funny, ironically, because BJP is using sedition nowadays to arrest people, when its leading figure was actually one of those who advocated against sedition. So he and I think this could be due to the fact that he was in the opposition and therefore his speech was being oppressed. That could be the case, but that doesn't matter. The fact that he stood up is actually what matters. The fact that he stood up for absolute freedom of speech in a time where no one else, it was a lonely fight for him. So, and then the idea of that was not the last thing that happened, the First Amendment. The idea then came towards the cinema in the realm of cinema. So, and there's a story behind it. So basically, C. Rajgopalachari, who was a governor at that time of, I think, governor of some state. So they were making a movie on, I think, the Kakori conspiracy event, right? So he was afraid that movie would inflame some people. In India, he said people are basically semi-literate people. It would inflame the romantic. It would romantically influence the semi-literate people to commit violence against the state. He wrote a letter to Patel. Patel said, we don't have any measures right now to control what movies they're going to make, but you can. He basically hinted that you tell them personally to not make that movie. And then in the aftermath of that event, the Cinematograph Act was formed, which established the censor board, which before showing any movie, you show the movie to the censor board, and if it deems a movie which is not the censor board in India, it doesn't just cut scenes or anything. It can stop the screening of a certain movie, right? So it stopped the screening of the Sri Lankan documentary that came in. So I think this is extremely problematic, and the Congress people are not going to talk about it, and the Congress people are not going to do anything about it because it's political expedient for them. They talk about right now. They're talking about sedition. They're talking about freedom of speech. They're talking about this, that. But the fact of the matter is that it was Nehru who suppressed freedom of speech. It was Nehru who arrested the Bollywood lyricist and poet Majrooh Sultanpuri for writing a poem against Nehru. Right? It was his regime that arrested, and they don't talk about that. And they're certainly not going to limit sedition because they have used it in the past against the likes of Arundhati Roy. They're going to use it, whether it's the Congress or the BJP. Both these parties are going to use it. If they're not in power, they will talk against it. But when they're in power, they're going to use it. So I don't see, unless there is a mass movement, I don't see it going. I don't see us achieving absolute freedom of speech.
What's your view on the semi-literate comment?
Right. So I think that is extremely insulting to the people of India.
Do you think that's factually incorrect? Here's what I'm trying to get
uh,
at. Here's what I'm trying to get at. You said there has to be mass acceptance, mass movement for something like this to happen. Try making that case to somebody outside your house. Do you think they'll understand?
no,
So the
because
semi-literacy seems
so
on point.
yeah, but that doesn't mean that you're going to suppress speech
No, no,
legally,
no,
you know.
not the consequence is not what I'm talking about. Because I understand the first instinct when the semi-literate comment was mentioned by you, I was like, really? But like the real question is, how honest do you want to be with yourself? And if you want to truly be honest, you cannot fight the fact that we are a fanatical bunch of people who have no sense of right and wrong, who are grasping at straws to make sense of our realities. And the Indian experiment is at its seam when it comes to I learned freedom of speech here in America. I was one of the most active, vocal activists on Columbia's campus for freedom of speech. Right? I started my own club on Columbia's campus for freedom of speech. I've hung out with Steven Pinker and the likes of these people, Jonathan Haidt and all those. We've invited them to Columbia's campus to talk about stuff like that. So I got associated with the First Amendment movement, even though this is not my battle, this is not my country, 3 years ago. And I've been fighting and I've been taking shit forever. And I've really, really dirtied myself in that mud. And I understand the nuance. I'm not like, here's the deal. With all that free speech America has protected in the First Amendment, their cities were still burning down because people did not feel spoken enough, understood enough. Right? So like there is no denying that you need to evolve on the First Amendment in America to make it work. But you don't need to regress on that. And the point being that I have understood that technicality and nuance because I've been engaged in this debate for 3 years. I do not know how I'm going to teach my best friend back in India about the importance of free speech. I don't know how I'm going to teach my dad about it.
See, I think the first step that we need to, like I was talking about forced progress, I think the first step to do it is to make it legal, you know. Then people will come around it, you know, because look at the Sati issue, for instance. You know, at that time, the majority of people believed in it. You know, Tilak spoke out against the, the Sati law that the likes of Rajmohan Rai advocated for. So I think sometimes what you have to do is you need to bring the law first, and then people will come to accept it. But if you don't have the necessary legal thing in place, then you're not going to convince people,
That's
because
what
they
leaders
will
are
always
supposed.
have this argument that, look here, this is unconstitutional, this is not legal, so what are you talking about? You're defending an illegal act, right? So that argument is obviously going to be there. So we have to first remove the legal obstructions
Obstacle.
that we have,
Mm-hmm.
and then we can have the
Cultural
mass
conversation.
acceptance, the cultural conversation.
Right. And I think that's what a leader is responsible for. And in that sense, my faith, at least since 2014, has been, and I'm not the only one, like I know enough people who were very pro BJP back in 2014 who felt let down. And part of the reason is because you realize the promises that were made immediately before acquiring power were very slowly depreciated over a 5, 6 year, 7 year window. And my point is, from a leader, if I was ever going to accept a man to be my leader, which I'm vehemently against, I'm animalistically against telling somebody they're my leader when it comes to stuff, especially grander stuff in life, then they're going to have to stand up for what I cannot think about right now. That's what a leader's supposed to do. He's supposed to herd you in the right direction. And that is something Vishnu Avatar, kahan ka Vishnu Avatar? If Vishnu Avatar is not like, free speech, I get so triggered about with the whole comic controversy as well. I don't really know if how long have we been at it? I think we've been at it for over an hour now. What would you say? Right? It's an hour and a half, something like that.
Yeah, it's an hour and 10 minutes or so.
Hour and 10 minutes. That's been good. That's been good. I don't want to jump into that because there is a part of me that's still very angry about the whole thing. But do you have any questions for me, Anwesh?
So, I was wondering because, I love the way you're having these conversations, but do you sometimes fear that, you're going to, when you have a stable sort of audience, that you're going to fall into that line of saying what people want to hear instead of, what you actually believe in?
Here's what I'll say. I have to be humble enough to admit the possibility. If I'm not, then I'm too confident on my own. I'm betting too hardly on myself. But what I will tell you is this: of my life that's been worth 24 years, the last 14, the ones that I've been awake and alive for, I have been, all I have been fighting is restrictions heavily, heavily from my families and from personal and from my own intra dynamic in my head. The point being, I cannot be pressured too long. If you put me in a scenario where I'm pressured for my, I mean, I don't want to say that my best friend's life or death. That's at least distant enough, that example. I can't be pressured. You dare not pressure me. I will probably for 3 days, 4 days under the pressure of something. If that's not, I cannot perform what's not truthful to me. I cannot, therefore, script anything and do anything. It's so difficult for me when the pressure is from the script itself. So much less from my audience. Like my primary focus has been my Hindi YouTube channel of late. And the last week or so, I spent worrying about what my audience is going to think of me if I start talking about politics or if I start doing comedy. And then I was like, I was so angry. I was like, me? Chalo, abhi karte. Let's crack indecent jokes right now. So I'm of that nature where I cannot perform. If you see me 10 years down the line still doing the same thing and I'm massively pro-Congress, then believe me, I'm actually pro-Congress. It's not because the Congress is paying me. Because I cannot do something that's not true to me. I haven't been able to do it yet. Bro, I was in my final year of chartered accountancy. My parents have a brilliant enterprise. I would have made enough money doing that. That just my heart did not say that. And so I left it final year. And I have no regrets, zero. The point being, if there is pressure, and my father figured this out very early, right? So what he would do is he would say the opposite of what he wanted me to do. Because he knew if he said, this is what you should do, Prakhar, I would never do it. So he'd be like, I'm going to tell you the opposite. And he'd declare that too. I have a hard time listening to people. I have a hard time. I will do things first principle my way and I will do them phenomenally well, but I won't take orders. So the possibility needs to be admitted that money might be too big a charm for little Prakhar, for fragile Prakhar. But I think Prakhar is preparing himself to be very, very strong in the future. And I don't think I'll sell out. Not ideologically. My whole enterprise has been to think properly. My whole service to my community is that I help you build your arguments, not mine. I don't tell you what I think. Very rarely, at least on my Hindi YouTube. Right? It's the whole point is my frustration with the Indian discourse is exactly the same as yours. It's not nuanced enough. And I'm going to use every single part of my charismatic personality, my autonomous leadership, whatever that might stand for, to bring people to think for themselves. And I mean, these values get reflected a lot better with my Hindi content because there I'm talking to the audience instead of talking to a guest. But when Abhinandan was telling me, he's like, you know what, stroll around. He was like, stroll around, talk to a bunch of people. Eventually you'll figure out where you fall. I was like, stroll around's nice. I don't want, bro, how many viewers do I get on this podcast? Nothing. I've been doing this for over a year now. In fact, my viewership went up for a while and then down. I don't care. I don't even check. It's not for that. It's for me. I'm trying to figure my stuff out. I don't care who's listening to this. So the general point being, I'm very weird like that. I'm very weird like that. Like it's not about, I don't even want to be right. I don't even care about that. I care about making you think. Because if I can do that, then you'll be inspired to think beyond me as well.
Well, that's exactly, what my purpose has been. It's like if I'm on public eye, like I am right now, so it's like I have to allow myself to be vulnerable. I'm going to say things right now which I will not agree with, say 5 years from now or something like that. And I will be honest. I'm going to be honest because look, it's extremely easy. I found out that it's extremely easy to gain followers, to sort of build a sort of readership. What you do is basically go to one side. But I have no intention of doing that. I'm going to think out aloud with people. I'm going to tell them what I think. And I'm interested in having these kind of conversation. And I really, this is the reason why I was so excited to talk with you, because the fact that what you're doing is extremely unique in today's sphere, because this intellectual dark web thing came up, and then some of the members of that dark web thing went, they basically
Dave Rubin, I hate you, Dave Rubin. I cannot stand Dave Rubin. That opportunistic piece of shit. I cannot stand that guy, bro. I get angry. I look at him and I get angry now.
Yeah, I used to love Dave Rubin. Because he was having conversation with the likes of Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss and Steven Pinker, and I'm like, okay, this is a fine guy. But now he's like the exact same thing. Like when I watch his soap, like for his clip or something which comes up on my Twitter feed, I'm like absolutely disgusted because he has no ideas right now. He says the exact same thing, and he's been sucked in
Even
by
then,
his
very
audience.
very early on when I got into the intellectual dark web, and that was such a phenomenon. I think there's going to be an entire generation that gets defined by those guys, especially Peterson. He's been so
I
influential.
think I think it's gone down now. I think it's dead.
I mean, sure, the phenomena is dead, the impact maybe not. But here's the deal. I remember the first time I heard Rubin, I was like, why is he famous? Because he was never really like, there is nothing about him that, the only thing is that he was willing to have, he was one of 5 people who was diagnosing a problem right back then, right? I
And
met
his
Dave,
studio was nice.
his studio was nice. I met Dave Rubin. I met Dave Rubin and Eric Weinstein the first time, somewhere in New York. They were giving a conversation together. And I mean, Eric's Eric. You want to
Yeah,
listen to that man speak for a whole day.
incredible guy.
Dave, I was like, Dave, can you stop sucking everyone's dick here? Can you be your own man? Like I had not like, everything he says is a repeat of an idea. Everything that has been so. Dave Rubin's been extremely. He let me down. I like Ben Shapiro, the way he thinks. I like it. Even the way he behaves is quite entertaining to me. Somebody described him as a lawyer trapped in a journalist's body, and I think that fits. But that was an interesting phase in my life. When I was listening to all these people, there was an interesting phase in my life. I'm going to have to make sure I get some of the swear words that I've used here to censored. I don't want that out. But besides that, I think I had a phenomenal conversation with you. You are welcome here anytime you want. If there is a point that you have to express, if there is a question you need to ask, if there is a conversation you want to fix, I will be there. I will make sure we have that conversation. We put up that event. If there's a debate you want to have, any of that, I'm down.
Me too. If you want to have me on again, I'm always ready. I mean,
Perfect.
It's always fun to talk with you.
I appreciate that, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah.